Right. All right. Okay. Yeah. Let's get started. So this is the assignment 7, and which is going to give us a chance to practice with Node.js and implement a middle tier RESTful service with the Node.js JavaScript framework. Also, a couple of slides. Let me present Node.js. Okay. All right. So let's talk about Node.js. Right. So remember that we've been using the client-server architecture to build our application, right? Where we have the client application that is built either with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, React.js, Angular. All those are front-end technologies, right, that come together to build the user interface that that interacts directly with the user, right? That is responsible for showing a pretty user interface with that the user finds pleasant, and they interact by typing at the keyboard and generating all sorts of gestures with their mouse, with their fingers, and so the UI is responsible for converting this stream of events, right, in sending over a structured data structure to the server representing these events, and the middle tier is responsible for taking these events, these actions, and converting them into changes in the data model, right? And the data model is there'll be some cached object-oriented representation of that data model in the CPU and the RAM of the server, which then gets mapped and stored permanently into in a database, right? So that's basically the architecture that we've been following, and up to this point for the front end, we've been using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React.js. You can certainly explore other options, Angular, certainly Vue.js. There's plenty of options for this front end development part. For the middle tier, we've been mostly either using the server that I provided, which is the generic server, and in the last couple of weeks, you had a chance to create your own server, right, using Java, and we call this the middle tier, right? We have the front end, it's like the first tier, right, the front tier, and then the server is kind of the middle tier, right, the tier in the middle, and then you have the database, as our back end. And so yeah, we're going to explore using Node.js instead of Java, or in addition to, and then for our database, we'll also use MongoDB. So we're not going to throw away anything we have so far. Now your React client is going to be talking to 3 different servers, right? It'll be talking to the generic server for a lot of the data, right? The courses, the modules, lessons, blah, 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 all that, right? It'll be talking to your server for the widgets, right? And then now it'll also be talking to another server, which we're going to create today, which will be a Node.js server that will be providing data about quizzes, right? And up to this point, we've focused our attention at implementing features for the faculty, right? The faculty can create courses, add content, whatnot, but now for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be focusing on implementing features for the student, right? So the student has different ways of interacting with the online application, online learning management system, and they can do homework, they can submit assignments, they can take exams, they can do all sorts of things, right? So this first part, we're going to be considering users or students taking a quiz, And quizzes are going to have several questions, and they're going to be able to answer these questions. They grade them, and keep track of scores and whatnot. So we're gonna focus on those features for the for the remainder of the semester. We're going to focus on what students might use this online learning management system. Okay. Yeah. So Node.js. So Node.js is nothing more than a JavaScript interpreter. Just like we have on the browser, we have an interpreter that understands, parses JavaScript, and then can execute the JavaScript within the browser. Well, you can take the same exact interpreter and rip it out of the browser and make it a desktop, command line interface that you can run JavaScript, but on the desktop, right, on a regular machine, as opposed to embedded inside of a browser. And so you might say, well, who cares? Big deal. Well, if you consider all the restrictions that JavaScript has within the browser, you start thinking, well, what could I do if I didn't have those restrictions? I mean, JavaScript running on the browser is certainly has it's restricted to, for instance, it doesn't have access to the file system, right? You can't write to the file system because of security issues, right? We don't want being able to download a script from who knows who wrote it, and then having access and then run it on our machine and have it and give it unfettered access to our file system. So JavaScript that runs in the browser is restricted so that it cannot use the file system, right? Other restrictions are, we notice all these coarse errors that we've been getting, right? That there's some restrictions on what, who can the JavaScript talk to in the network. And so normally it would talk to only the server that it was downloaded from, or any server who might give it permission, that has course correctly configured and can talk to that server and whatnot. So it has that limitation as well, and also data. Where's the server, the browser going to get, in JavaScript running on the browser? Where's it going to get its data? It needs some server, some surrogate that it can connect to through HTTP and retrieve data, right? So it's fairly constrained, right, on some of the things that it can do. It can only connect through HTTP. Now, if you remove it from the browser, right, and you can now run it on the desktop, now it's just an application like any other application, right? It can read, write from the file system. It can connect anywhere in the network, right, unrestricted with no security. As long as it can log in wherever it needs to log in, it can talk to anyone, right? It has access to the databases, right? You can have all sorts of libraries and whatnot. So definitely, there's a lot of things that you can do on the browser, on the desktop that you can't do on the browser, and vice versa, though, right? There are things that you can do in the browser that you can't do on the desktop. So, like for instance, JavaScript running on Node.js, it doesn't have a user interface, right? There are no buttons or anything that you can interact with. There's just a command line, right? So together, right, JavaScript running on the browser and JavaScript running on the middle tier, they can complement each other very well, right? So that you divvy up some of the tasks amongst these JavaScript running on different places, and then they can just communicate and collaborate through HTTP. Okay. So yeah, definitely there's a lot to gain by having JavaScript collaborate, running on different machines and different environments. Now, to get a hold of Node.js, right, you need to visit nodejs.org, and from here you can download your Node.js from here and install it. Just download the latest one, 14.16. That's plenty. So when you install it, right, it'll install several tools. Just tell it to install everything. But in particular, there are two executables that we are going to be interested in. One of them is Node itself, right? Node is just a command line tool that you can just run as a node. That's it, right? It automatically will add it to your path, right? So you're going to be able to run it from the terminal or console, whatever, right? It also is going to install another tool called npm. npm stands for Node Package Manager. Node Package Manager, and it's basically it's a build tool, right? It's a tool for building, for installing things, uninstalling, updating libraries, right? And we're going to be using these two together quite a bit, Node and npm, right? In and out, all for the remainder of the semester. I mean, we've been using npm a little bit already, right? We've been installing React Redux, React Router DOM. We've been using npm already, so you should already have Node installed already on your machine, right? Because I mean, we've been using it for React, and React.js depends on Node. Nevertheless, you can use Node independently of React.js, right? Right now, we've been using Node.js strictly as a means of hosting a React application, but certainly Node can exist independently of React.js, solely as a middle tier solution, and that's where we're going to be focusing on for the remainder of the semester, right? Node used as a middle tier. I mean, we'll still use Node for our React development, certainly, right? But most of our focus will be on how is that we use it to build middle tier solutions. Okay, so it all starts with creating a project for developing in Node.js, and so Node.js application. So let's do that. Oh, let's minimize this. Okay, so let's bring up a terminal. Okay, let's see. So let's head over to what do we got here? So let's go to documents. So let's go to NEU, web dev, and let's go to section 2. Okay, so we're going to create here an npm, a Node.js project, and we do that with npm. Okay, but first we need to create a directory. So let's create a directory, and let's see, we'll call it it'll be a server, just like we have a Java server. This is going to be a Node server. Okay, so let's go in there, and right now there's nothing in there. And so the way we create a project, a Node.js project, is that we use npm. We say npm init. Okay, so this is going to kick off a wizard that is going to ask us the name of the Node.js package. Right, so we're basically a Node.js application is a Node.js package, right? That can execute on its own. So by default, it takes the name of your directory as the name of the package, and say yes. Version is 1, description. So this is a sample Node server. And index, test command, git. If you have a git repository, but you're going to store it, you could put it in here. Not required. Author, I'm going to put myself. License. Okay. So basically, what it creates is a JSON document. Right. If you say ls, you'll notice that it creates this package.json file, and which describes the project. Right. So if you look at the content, it's basically just a JavaScript, right? Document. Okay. And now this document plays the same role as the pom.xml file plays in a Java project, right? If you remember, pom.xml contained resources and dependencies that the project depended on, right? For instance, in there you might have found that it said that it needed certain libraries to compile and run, right? Including the MySQL connector, right, to connect to the MySQL database, right? Connect also dependencies with JPA and Spring Boot and whatnot. So it listed all dependencies that when you ran Maven, right, Maven clean install, or when you ran it inside of your IDE, right, it downloaded all those libraries and copied them locally as jar files and added them to the class path. Well, package.json plays the same role here. Well, right now there are no dependencies listed here, but we're going to be adding quite a few other dependencies, and they're going to be listed in this file. And you have to make sure that they are listed here, right? You need to make sure that if you download any libraries for implementing all sorts of things, that they are listed here as dependencies. Otherwise, when you deploy it, when you deploy it on Heroku or some other environment, AWS, Azure, whatnot, right? If the dependencies are not listed, then those infrastructures won't know that they need to download and install all those libraries for your project to work, right? So you don't want to end up with having the project run fine locally in your machine, but then it crashes and burns when you deploy it remotely. So yeah, so let's open this project with our favorite IDE. So we'll go in IntelliJ, and from in there we'll open this new project that we just created. So we're going to open, and let's see. So NEU, web design 02, and it's not listed. What? 2021, 02, server node. Oh, refresh. What? Why isn't it showing? Documents, NEU, web dev, 2021, 02. Did I put it in the wrong directory? Cancel. I am in the right directory, yes. Since drive C. And I have 3 directories in there, but I don't show the node. Interesting. Let's try that again. Open. Documents, NEU. NEU, web dev, 2001, 02. Oh, there it is. Well, whatever. Let's open it. There it is. Okay, so if we open it, we just have our package.json. And just to illustrate, developing here in Node.js, let's build our very first trivial Node.js application. So trivial that it'll be silly. So let's create a JavaScript file, and we'll call it hello.js. And you can imagine what it will do, right? It'll just do console log, and we'll do hello world. There we go. So this is the most trivial Node.js application ever. And there we have hello.js, and we can run it. We can say node and then hello.js, and we see that indeed it spits out hello world. Right, there it is. So that's the canonical hello world application we academics like to show, just to give the simplest of examples. Yes. But you can imagine that you have the full-blown access to all the good stuff that you've been using JavaScript for in React.js. You have the for loops, the while loops, if statements, functions, and classes, constructors, and you have full-blown use of ES6. What you don't have, right? You don't have the DOM, right? Unlike the JavaScript running on the browser, where you can manipulate the DOM, right, to have some user interface. There's no such thing here. We don't have a DOM, right? There's no user interface to talk about whatsoever, right? So what this application that we're going to be implementing is going to be strictly running on a desktop on a server, listening for incoming requests from a JavaScript that is running on a browser, right? And they're going to be talking to each other through HTTP. Okay. So yeah. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to be using a library. Let's see, hello world. We're going to be using a library called Express. Right? So Express is one of the most popular Node.js libraries. And now all these libraries are available at npmjs.com. Right? So this is a repository of many Node.js packages and libraries that are freely available. You can publish your own library here for free, and folks can use your library by just using npm install, and they can install your library. Okay. But one of the more popular libraries is the Express library, which this week has had almost 17 million downloads. So yeah, very, very, very popular. It's it makes it very, very easy to create an HTTP server, right? Just with a few lines of code, boom, you got a middle tier. Okay, so here they have their example hello world server, right? That the only thing that it says is hello world. Okay, and so let me demonstrate. And so we'll create here a JavaScript, right? And we'll call it server.js, and we'll paste that in there. Yeah. So this Express here, right? Is that's the name of the library that we're going to be using. And so, I mean, libraries is really what makes a language worthwhile, right? I mean, the language per se might not be very exciting. What's exciting are the all the libraries and the community that that builds around a library or infrastructure, and and all the collaboration that goes on and building all sorts of really cool modules that can be reused and put together and to build even more interesting things, right? So, and definitely Express is one of those types of projects that really has made building complex things very easy. Okay, so yeah, so definitely I encourage you to take a look at it. They have a website here which you can visit. Well, that's their GitHub. They have express.js.com, which has a full API reference and guides and tutorials and topics and for you to read. So I highly encourage you to read through it. It's very useful. We're going to be using the tippy top features of Express, enough for us to build something meaningful. But definitely, I encourage you to explore more on your own. So first of all, we'll need to install Express, right, before we could actually run this code. And so in the root directory, we're going to implement and install, and we're going to say npm install Express. Okay. Plus, we're going to add save -- save. So this guarantees that this library is recorded in the package JSON as a dependency, right? Saying that, hey, our project won't work unless we have this library, right? So make sure you install it. So let's do that. So while that's going on, you'll notice that in the list of projects, right? Notice we have package JSON, right? And you'll notice that now the Express is being listed in a new section called dependencies. See that? And this is how Heroku or any place where you install this remotely will know that it needs to download those libraries. Also, down under here, you'll see a new directory pop up. Let's see. It's not showing yet. Where is it? Is it still going? No. Refresh. Why is this not refreshing? close. Hello. Did it create it? ls. Oh yeah, there it is. There's a node underscore module. Why is it not showing over here? File. Is it a refresh? There is no refresh. Well, whatever. So notice that there's a new directory here. It's called node underscore modules. That's the directory where all libraries that you download and install, right? They're copied under node underscore modules. And actually, there's plenty of stuff in there. I mean, there's tons of stuff. Even though we only installed Express, right? And there it is. There's Express, right? Under node underscore modules. Express depends on other things, right? And so these packaged JSON files, they create kind of like a dependency chain where, you know, my project depends on Express, Express depends on a whole bunch of other things, and those things might depend on others. And what NPM does is that it resolves all those dependencies, right, and downloads the necessary libraries, right, and it copies them locally on your machine. Okay. All right. So yeah, we did that. Okay. So now that we have Express installed, we can go back to our server and start trying to make sense out of this. Okay. So yeah. So first of all, notice that there's this keyword require, and require plays the same role as import, right? In React.js. Oops, sorry. So we're not going to be using import here in Node.js, right? But require plays exactly the same role, right? So it's requiring a different package, and that package is presumably it's exporting something. So require resolves that export, right, from that other package, and whatever it exports, okay, it's bound to on the left-hand side in a local variable. So this express local variable is bound to whatever this thing exported. Okay, very much like import export, right, in React.js. And you can, you know, just like in React.js and ES6, you can export whatever you want. You can export a single variable, you can export an object, you can export a function, you can export whatever you want. Express turns out that it exports a function. Okay, and so Express is actually a function which you can invoke. Once you invoke it, all sorts of things happen. It sets up, it initializes itself, it gets ready. Okay, and it returns a reference to the API on how to use Express. Right? So app is a very common name for this variable. You don't have to call it app, but right, it's a very common name, right? And so we can use app, right, to create a server, right, to start a server listening, an HTTP server listening on a particular port, right, by just saying app.listen 3000 or whatever port we want to listen. But 3000 is a very common port number to listen at, right? Now this might collide with Node.js running your React.js, right? React.js, I believe, also runs on 3000. So you might want to change this to something else, maybe 4000. 4000 is also very common. So it starts the server, listens at port 4000, so it doesn't collide with other servers hosting, you know, React.js or whatever, listening also 3000. Otherwise, you're going to be a collision. And then you can configure, you know, what it is that you're listening at, right? You're listening for, you know, these incoming HTTP GET requests, right? So app.get says that I am listening for incoming HTTP GET request, and has two arguments. So the first argument here, the first argument says the URL pattern that I'm listening for, right? So slash is the root, right? So meaning, you know, just a domain, right? Localhost, blah, 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 whatever. So at the root, if you send me a request there, I am going to invoke the following function. Okay, this is very, very similar to what we did in Java, right? Where we did, you know, at get mapping, right? Where we put it we were able to put a URL up there. Remember that? And then we put it on top of the function that we wanted to map it to. Remember that? So here it's a little more explicit. You know, this is instead of using annotations, this uses a function .get. You know, provides the URL pattern what we're listening for, and this is the function that will execute right when that URL comes in. Okay. So let's look at this function now. So this function, notice that it's a lambda function, right? It's a no name function, it's an anonymous function, right? We could have just created our own function and passed it in here. We'll see we'll see an example of that. But what I want to point out is that this function has the following syntax, right? It takes as argument these two variables, right? One we're calling it REQ, the other RES. And they stand for request response, right? So request corresponds or encapsulates everything that is coming from the client, right? So remember, we are building a client server application, right? And we are on the server side of that architecture, right? We are on the server side, meaning there's some clients. The front tier, right? The front end is sending a request, right? And that request, it's everything that comes from the browser, right? From the client, includes the URL, includes any parameters in that URL, any queries after the question mark, any headers, any cookies, any JSON body embedded in the body that is being sent over. So all of that is embedded inside of this REQ. Okay. So the first argument to this function, receives everything that's coming from the client. The second argument, it has to be in that order. Obviously, right? This represents the response that the server, the server here running here, this is the response that the server can generate back to that response, that request. So meaning, the request comes in and now we can fulfill that request. They're asking us to do something and our response will be the fulfillment of that request. Okay. Here we are fulfilling that request by just responding, right, with a simple hello world. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at it. We can run it from the command line here. Right, from the root, we are at the root, right? So we can run it here. We can say node server. Notice that it runs and it's blocked, right? It's waiting now. It's waiting for incoming requests, right? And we can fulfill that by going to the browser and going to localhost. What was it? 4,000. 4,000 / so it's at the content, at the root of the context. We say enter, and indeed notice that it returns hello world. See that? Now this URL that we used here could really be anything, right? This can be anything. Right? Let's stop the server. We can run it. We can run it from here, or we can run it from the terminal inside of our IDE as well. Notice that we have a terminal here, right? So we can say, node server. So again, the blocks waiting for incoming requests. And here, notice that we refresh. Notice that / is no longer mapped to anything, right? So it says, I didn't find anything mapped to it, right? Sorry, I don't know what to give you. So we can be, can, is it mapped to can? No, it maps to can be. So let's try it again. So can be. Okay, no, there's nothing at B. We keep going. So can be, oops, right? Anything. There it is. Okay, notice that it matches that URL, right? And then it executes responding with hello world. That makes sense? Everybody good? Okay, so let's do something a little more interesting. Let's stop that. Stop. Okay, so how about let's pass maybe arguments to this function, right? So let's also respond to another get, and we're going to pass in maybe want to add something, want to add two numbers, and we want to pass them as parameters in the path, right? We know how to handle that in Java, right? We use the path variable, right? Here's slightly different, but same concept, right? We're going to pass parameter A, and we're going to pass parameter B, okay? And then we'll execute a function. Now, instead of embedding the function here as an anonymous function, let's actually create a function. We'll call it add, okay? And so let's declare it here. So const add. Now, this function is always here that's listening to the HTTP request, right? When that's going to be invoked by get, right? It's always going to be take as arguments the request and the response. Okay. Right. This response, that's a response that you get, right? Remember in React.js, you do .then response JSON. Remember that? Well, this is the response, right? That's being generated from the server. Okay. Also notice that I am deliberately not calling it REQ and RES. I'm calling it request and response. So these names don't have to be REQ or RES. It can be anything. It's just that the first argument is the request coming from the client, and the second one is what the server uses to fulfill that response, that request, right? Okay, so when the server sees this URL parameter, it'll execute this function add. Okay. All right. So let's retrieve the values param A and param B. Right. So we'll store them in a local variable A. So how do we retrieve this? How do we retrieve? So the way we retrieve, remember, the URL and anything coming from the browser, everything is represented in the request object. Okay. So in particular, these two paths, notice that I have colons in front of them. That means that these are not hard-coded values. It can be anything, right? The colon. And what it does, what get does when it sees this URL pattern, it's going to parse it, right? And it's going to, it realizes that this is a colon. So anything that matches this is going to pattern match it with this, right? And this is a placeholder, not a literal string, right? So anything that falls in the second and third element of this path, right, is going to parse it and bind it. It's going to create a map, right, and put it in the request. The map is called params. So request.params is a map that contains all the path variables, right, that are in there. So params, you say params dash param A. Okay. All right. Yeah. And so we can do the same thing for B. Now you can use, since this is a since params is a map, you can use two different notations. You can use the square bracket notation like this, right? Or you could use the dot notation. You use either one. Okay, they are syntactically equivalent. Okay. All right. So as a response, what do we want to send? So a response, we want to send, okay, A plus B. Okay. All right. Let's see what that happens. Let's see what that does. Right. We're going to send back A plus B. Okay. Let's start the server now. Notice that I've been starting the server from here, from the command line. So instead, I'm going to create a dedicated runtime. Let's say add configuration. Let's say plus new Node.js. Where is it? Node.js. There it is. And I want to execute the server file. server.js. Say okay. Right, and I'm going to say run. And so this should be running just like I would have typed it in the command line. And if I refresh, notice that this still works. Okay, so let's try now the add. So let's add 4 and 7. Notice that instead of adding the numbers 4 and 7, it actually concatenated the string values of 4 and 7. Okay, so we need to massage this a little bit. What we're going to do is that we're going to convert these to be integers. Let's convert this into the integer. So parse int. And same thing here. Okay, so now this is going to be the arithmetic addition of A and B, not the string concatenation of strings A and B, right? So let's restart this. Okay. Are you sure you want to start it? Yes, I want to stop it and run it. Okay, now let's run this again. Notice it's giving us an error, right? And the reason it's giving us an error is that if you're sending a string, then that's fine. But if you send a number, if the server just responds with a number, right? The browser interprets that as an error, right? Like for instance, if the server responds with a 200, that's considered a status code of okay. Everything is okay. If it responds with a 404, right? That is an error of I can't find what you're looking for, right? So I'm basically returning a status code of 11, which is some bogus status code, and it's complaining that it's out of range. There's no, so it's not it's an invalid status. Okay, so we need to convert this back to a string or something else that it will not be considered a status code, right? So I'm going to convert this into a string. So I'm going to put this inside of a quote like that, and then instead of a curly bracket, right, and then $. So basically, this is I've converted it into a string template expression, right, which basically is going to be the string of A plus B, the arithmetic A plus B, right? So let's restart here. Now, notice, why did I even bother creating this this configuration? And if I run it, instead of running it just normally, I can run it in debug mode, right? I can start it in debug mode. And that allows me to debug, see if something is wrong. Because if I put a breakpoint here, right, and I refresh, notice that the server pauses here, right, at this line. So I can look at the values of A and B. I can look at the requests, objects, response. I can see local variables. So this is a great tool to debug your server. You can do the same thing in Java. Also, Java, you can run it in debug mode. And I strongly encourage you to use this feature of debugging your code on the server. If I see that you come to office hours and you don't have a server configuration, I'm going to be very suspicious that if you spent any time debugging your code, right? This definitely improves dramatically your capability of finding errors within your code. Okay, so I'm just going to continue here. Continue, and notice that now it came back with the string 11. Okay, everybody good? Okay, excellent. All right, let me show you yet another way that you can pass data. Instead of using parameters, let's use another. Let's do subtract. Okay, so we'll do subtract. Okay, but this time around, we are not going to pass subtract. Okay, we're not going to pass the query. We're not going to pass the data embedded as parameters. Right? Instead, let's see what are my alternatives. Let's take a look at another alternative. So request response. So we want to do the same thing, right? We want to be able to grab a value for A, right? Something for A, and we want to grab a value for B. Okay. So how can we do this? So if we're not passing part of the path, another way that we can pass it is with query. As instead of putting it in the path, you can say question mark, and then you can put a list of parameters at the end of the query string, right? And the way you retrieve that from the request, right? You can say request, just like there's a params, if it's embedded inside of a path, well, there's also query. Query is another map, right? That is the result of parsing everything after the question mark, right? So what we want to be able to do is this. We're going to say subtract question mark, right? And you're going to pass x equal 9 and ampersand y equal 6. Okay, we want to be able to say that. And so notice that the parameters are being passed after the query string. See that? And the parameters and the syntax is that it's the variable name equals some value. So another variable name equals some value, and then it's separated with an ampersand, right? You can do this same thing in Java. We didn't go over it, but it's very easy. Same thing. If you really want to do that, we can go over it. But here it's very, very easy. The query, this query represents everything after this here after the question mark, right? Is referred to as the query string. Okay, and so what query does is that it's going to parse all these variables x and y, right? And then the map contains the values. So the variables are the keys, and then the values are the actual data. So you can say x, okay, and then also extract y. Okay, there we go. And so now we have the values, right? We can't forget to parse them. So we're going to parse int. Oops. So parse int. There we go. And then so the solution C is just going to be A minus B. There we go. Nope. And we're going to respond. We're going to send back a string representation of the subtraction of C. Up. Okay. All right. Another lazy way of doing the same thing is C and then concatenate it with a empty string. That casts the value to a string, right? And then it just returns C. Okay, so let's restart the server. Start the server and let's do subtract. So this would be subtract 9 minus 6 is 3. Everybody good? All right. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so notice our code is starting to get a little crowded in here in our server. So what we're going to do is that we're going to move most of our code out of here, and so basically all this code is what is just dealing with HTTP, isn't it? It's just dealing with incoming HTTP requests. Yes, and just like we did in Java, right? Everything that has to do with HTTP, we put it inside of a controller, right? We're going to do the same thing, right? We're going to create here another directory. We'll call it the controllers directory, and these are just some demos, some demonstration, right? So let's create a JavaScript file called demos controller on controller. And so we're going to cut all that content and we're going to move it over to here, right? So now these two need to talk to one another, right? We need to collaborate. So how How do we collaborate? So we're going to use the mechanism of require, right? Export and require, right? So basically this needs to be able to export all of this, right? And then here I'm going to need to be able to import it from the server. Okay. All right. So basically I need to be able to require the controller, which is inside of the controllers, and then the demos controller. Okay, notice the syntax here. Notice that this has a dot. See that? Whereas this one doesn't have a dot. Okay, so when it doesn't have a dot, it means that it should look for that. It should look for this inside of Node_modules. And indeed, notice that express is there. See that? So that's where it's finding it. If instead it starts with a dot, it means don't look in the Node_modules. Instead, look in the file system, starting at the current location, and then go down, navigate down to controllers. So go down to controllers and then down to demos controller. Okay, so that's important. So I'm going to require. So if this requires, that means that the demos controller needs to be able to export. But what should it export? What should we export here? Okay, we want to export everything basically. Now, but we want to export enough. Notice what's missing here. Notice what's missing. So these are all, self-standing function. Well, they're not, right? They're expecting request and response, which it's only being sent over from app.get. But notice that I don't have app here, right? So somehow, app is declared up here, and there can only be one app, but I need it down here. I need it inside this file. So how do I do that? I need to pass it somehow the app, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to export, right? And the way you export in Node.js is by using module.exports. So module.exports, right? It's the equivalent of doing a export default. Okay, and so anything that you assign to module.exports will be available to anybody who does a require, right, on this file. Okay, so what we're going to assign, and you can assign anything you want. It could be a variable, it could be an object, right? It could be just a little string, right? Anything. And there's only one module.exports, right? You can only export one here. And so what we're going to export, we're going to export in a function. We're going to export a function. Right, so we're going to assign this function to the export. So whoever requires it here, and we assign it. All right, so this is the controller or demos. Okay, so demos is now a function, whatever function that is. Okay, but the reason we want a function is that now I should be able to just say take demos, right, and then pass you down app. See that? I can pass you app to you, so you can receive it here, and then I could use it to configure all these apps. See that? Let's clean this up. Let's say code, reformat code. There we go. Okay. All right. Notice that now, right now I have app is no longer undefined. You are passing it to me, right? From way up there in the exports in the server, you're passing it to me right here. Okay, makes sense? Everybody good?
Quick question. Yes. What is the difference between using require and using import and export default?
Yeah, we just don't have that import here. That's only available in the it's not supported here. No, Node.js does not support that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and require has been here much longer than imports. Yeah, imports are much newer. Yeah, so notice that if we restart the server, right, everything should work just the same. Nothing should have changed functionally. Right? If I refresh, this is still working, right? This is still, I can still subtract, so nothing has changed. But obviously, server.js is much simpler. It's easy to read, right? And it's a good practice, right, to break up large application into smaller modules that can work together. Okay. All right. Excellent. So let's start using what we've learned so far, right, to tackle some of the parts in the assignment, right? So let's go take a look at the assignment again. So the assignment said something about we're going to be implementing quizzes, right? And the questions within quizzes, and we're going to have students take quizzes and whatnot. So the data that we want to be able to manipulate is not strings or numbers or whatever. We want to manipulate JSON objects. Okay, and so here's an example of the JSON objects I want you to be able to manipulate. Right, it's this array of quizzes. Right, so we're going to store this data in a JSON file right now, but in the upcoming week, right, we're going to replace this file with a non-relational database, Mongo. Right now, because we don't have a database, right, we're going to be using this file, but we're going to revisit that next week, right, and use Mongo instead. But for now, we're just going to be a file and only implement the read-only operation. So we're going to read this file. We're never going to write to the file. Okay, we're never going to update this file. We're only going to be reading from the file. Next week, we're going to throw away the file altogether, right, and do the database. And we'll do read-write, right, to the database. Okay. This week we're just learning how to create RESTful services using Node.js. Okay, so also in like the architecture that we have been following in Java, we're going to bring over here, right? Just like we said that the HTTP, everything that has to do with HTTP, right, that's being handled by controllers. Also, right, we said that anything that has to do with data manipulation, creating data, retrieving data, updating data, deleting data, if you remember, right, that is the responsibility of a service, right? Services are responsible for doing all the data manipulation, right? Whether it's Java, C#, JavaScript, whatever, right? It's the same concept, okay? So we're going to create a directory called services, and we're going to put all the services and all data related stuff in there, okay? Right, so let's do that. Let's create here a directory, and we'll call it services. Okay, and the data that we would have put in there is this JSON file that we want to be able to manipulate, right? So this is quizzes.json. Right, I'm going to paste that in there. Okay, there we go. All right, so right now we just have 3 quizzes. Notice that each quiz has its own unique title. It also has its own unique identifier. And notice this is going to represent the primary key in a record that is stored in a database, right? In particular, it's going to be a Mongo database, right? Now notice that it has an underscore in front of it. Okay, this light's killing me. Notice that it has an underscore in front of it, okay? And the reason I put an underscore in front of it is because I'm looking ahead that next week we're going to introduce Mongo, and Mongo's primary keys, right, have the underscore in front of it. Okay, so the code that I want to build and write today, I want it to be already forward compatible, right, with what we're going to be building next week, right, with Mongo and so on and so forth. Okay, so underscore IDs are all primary keys representing these records that are stored in the database. Okay, so we want to be able to CRUD this data, right? We want to be able to create, read, update, and delete this, right? And where do we implement that? Well, according to our architecture, right, that's in a service file. A service file is responsible for manipulating this, right? So let's do that. So instead of services, what are we manipulating? We're talking about quizzes. So this will be a quizzes service, right? So let's do that. Let's create a JavaScript, and this will be quizzes service. And in here is where you would implement everything that has to do with dealing with this data, including all the CRUD operations. So you would have things such as, create quizzes, right? Create a quiz, right? So implemented here, you would have, find all quizzes would be here. You would have find quiz by ID. And you would have, let's see, CRUD up. So update quiz would be here. And you would have delete quiz, right? So all the CRUD operations would be here. Okay. And then, right, somebody is going to need to use all this data manipulation, right? So who's going to use it? Maybe remember in our architecture, right? We have at the server level, we have the controller be at the forefront, right? Which is receiving all the HTTP requests. Okay, and then remember the controller only knows how to deal with HTTP, right? With paths and queries and JSON bodies and whatnot, but it doesn't. Its responsibility is not to deal with data, right? Instead, it delegates all the responsibility to the service, this service, right? So it needs to be able to import all these methods, right, and be able to use it from the controller. So to export all of this, what we're going to do is that we're going to, very much like we did in React, right? We're going to create a map that has all these functions, and then export that so that others can use this API, right? So we're going to do module exports. Now, before we had exported a function. Here, we're going to export an object, and that object, right, is just going to have a list of these functions, right? All these functions, and then update and delete. Right. And so the controller is going to use this, it's going to import, right, and then use all these functions. So let's implement a couple of these, right? So right now for this assignment, we're only going to implement these two, right? Only the read operations. And next week, when we talk about the database, we will do the other ones, right? So I'm gonna put them in order like this. So this is to do. This is Node.js assignment, and this is to do. And this is in the MongoDB assignment. Okay. Next week. This week. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's implement these two. So what does this do? Find all quizzes basically is going to return what? This JSON file. Okay, basically it returns this file. So the way we could do this very easy is that we can just import that file. We can import it and assign it to this local file, local variable quizzes. There we go. So that loads that file and assigns it to this variable quizzes. So find all quizzes is trivial. It's just going to return the quizzes. See that? Now find quiz by ID, presumably you're going to pass the quiz ID. And so what we're going to return is we're going to iterate over the quizzes, and when we find the quiz that matches the ID, we're going to return that quiz, right? So we can do that by using quizzes.find, right? And so here's a quiz, and we're going to return which quiz? The quiz whose ID matches that quiz ID. So we're going to return the quiz whose ID matches the quiz ID. Okay. I think that's it. That is it. Notice that we can test this, right? We can test this right here. We can say, we can call the function right here, right? Find all quizzes, and we can execute this from the command line, right? So if we go into the command line and we stop this, sorry, in the terminal, where's the terminal? Terminal. And in the terminal, if we head over to cd services, dir, there we have quizzes service. We can run it. We can say node. Wait, let me take this out of the way. Run. Install dependencies. Don't ask again. We can say node quizzes services. Quizzes services. Const find all quizzes. Find all quizzes. Oh, well, find all quizzes, and we want to do console log final quizzes. There it is. So it does returns all the quizzes and prints them out. Or we can try out the other one too, right? We can try the other one, say all by itself, right? Console log find quiz by ID, and we can pass 1 to 3. So let's run that. Notice that indeed it can return 1 to 3. So yeah, so it works. They work. So let's now, right? We don't want to do this from the command line. Actually, I'll leave that and comment it out for you. We want to be able to do this from HTTP, right? And so let's export this and make them available as a RESTful API, right? So let's go in controllers and create a controller for our quizzes, right? So we'll create here a JavaScript, and this will be quizzes controller. And this will have the same exact design as our demos controller, right? We're gonna have a function which we're going to export, which is going to take app as an argument, and now we can write our getters, right, to retrieve, right? We want to be able to send a request where we want to retrieve all the quizzes, right? And another one where we can retrieve a specific quiz if we pass the ID, quiz ID, okay? And if those two incoming requests come in, we want to invoke a local function, find all quizzes, right? And we want to invoke another function, find quiz by ID. Okay, so we're gonna map this to that one, and we're gonna map this one to this one right here. Okay. All right. So how does find all quizzes work? Right. Remember, this is only HTTP stuff, right? Request, response, participating in the client server architecture. Right. So this is request response. So all these functions receive these two arguments, request response, right? And it's their responsibility to participate in this request response architecture. So what's this guy gonna do? It doesn't know what to do, where to get the data, but it knows who can handle that, right? And in our case, it's the service. The service is responsible for actually implementing the retrieval of the data, right? So this one is implemented using the service. Let's import the service. Const quizzes service. Let's require up one and then down to services and then quizzes service. All right, so now we can implement this in terms of quizzes services. Get the quizzes from quizzes services. Find all quizzes. Now that we have the quizzes, we can just send them back to whoever asked for this, right? So response dot sent back quizzes. Okay. And what about find quiz by ID? Same thing, right? But first we need to parse the quiz ID. So we say const q ID. I'm going to parse it from parameters. So it would be request.params and then quiz ID. Okay. And then we're going to retrieve the quiz from the quizzes service, right? Find quiz by ID, has the quiz ID, right? And then once we have the quiz, we can just send back the quiz from the service. Okay. All right. Excellent. So we've implemented the service. We've implemented the controller. One last thing is that we need to make it available in the server, and pass it the app, just like we did with our demo, right? We're going to grab the quizzes controller, and that will be controller quizzes controller. There it is, and then we can use it to call and pass in the app. Pass the app like that. All right, I think we're ready to start this and try it out. Let's start the server. And so here we can now play around with this and say, I want API quizzes. There they are. All right, there are our 4 quizzes. I mean, our 3 quizzes, right? Or we can ask for a specific quiz. Maybe we'll ask for this one right here. Right, so we'll go 2, 3, 4, and indeed we can receive our second quiz there, 2, 3, 4. Okay, excellent. So does that make sense? Is everybody still with me?
Quick question: when would you use params versus query?
Queries? Yeah. So the so RESTful APIs are very strict on their structure, right? And so on what you should pass in as params. Okay. I mean, you could implement something that is not RESTful, and and create your own structure and do whatever you want, but then it would not be a RESTful API. So you can use a combination of RESTful API with queries, where, for instance, if you say you wanted to ask for all the quizzes, but then maybe it could be hundreds of quizzes, right? And so you would like to filter and say, well, maybe I don't want all the quizzes. Maybe I want the quizzes only for 2007, right? Or only those quizzes between so and so, right? For what semesters? Then you can use the query, right, to provide how you say a query, right? What do you call that? The filters by which you want to decide which ones to retrieve. Okay, predicates. Yes, a predicate, where you might say, start year, end year, right? Or start semester, end semester. Or say you want to retrieve all the employees, so it would be API employees. But then in the query, you can provide a predicate where you might say, well, I want only employees that have a minimum salary and a maximum salary, and then you retrieve. So you can do a combination of both, right? Because there's no way that you could put that in a path, right, as part of a RESTful API, right? Unless you break the RESTful API conventions, but then it would not be a RESTful API, right? So you can do a combination of both. Okay. Yeah. So in the RESTful API, this is the path is only used to establish relationship between parents and children, right? And the parameters are mostly just IDs. Okay, they're not some identifier, right, that identifies a specific value, right, or the parent element of several children. Okay. All right.
So
All right. So yeah, go ahead.
So if you use query, it is no longer a RESTful API?
No, it is. It is. Yeah. If you instead use those as part of the path, then it's not a RESTful API.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So having done that, we worked on the quizzes controller. We talked about the quizzes service. So now you're asked to do the same thing for questions, right? So now you're gonna have a whole bunch of questions. Okay, for instance, these questions. And let me copy it for you here. There's services, and let's create a new file here. We'll call it questions JSON, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to make it look a little prettier. Code, reformat code. There we go. Okay, so there are 3, 5, 7 questions here, of which the first 3, you'll notice, have a quiz ID. So all questions have a quiz ID. So establishing a one-to-many relationship, right? A quiz has many questions, right? So this question belongs to quiz 234. So does this one, right? This one also belongs to quiz 234, and this one too. So quiz 234 has 3 questions. Then here we have quiz 345 and quiz 345. So quiz 345 has 2 questions. And finally, quiz 123 has just 1 lonely question. Okay. Also, there are 2 types of questions. A question is either a true/false question or is a multiple choice question, right? So here's another true/false question. Okay. So true/false questions they all have a question. So all questions have a question, right? And all questions have a title. Okay. And all questions have a correct answer, right? Correct answer. But the multiple choice question also has choices. Okay, has choices. Okay, so whereas a true/false question, the value true can be used to, to compare your answer, right? It only has 2 choices, right? It can be either true or false. The multiple choice is basically has many choices, right? So a true/false question can be considered a special case of a multiple choice question, right? Right. A true/false question is like a multiple choice that only has 2 choices, true/false, and it's always true/false. Okay. And so in the UI, you're going to render them differently using different React components, just like we did widgets, right? Remember widgets? You had different types of widgets, and they render differently. Same thing here, right? The true/false question is going to render one way, and the multiple choice question is going to render a different way. Okay. So you're going to need to implement. You're being asked to implement a controller and a service that allows you to retrieve the questions for a given quiz, right? Where you can pass in the quiz ID, right? And then ask for the questions for that quiz, and then you retrieve that particular set of questions, right? And you create a service and controller for the question. So the same thing we did for the quizzes, you're going to do it for the questions. Okay. All right, let's look at the server. So the server, their server here is a little bit different than what we have. In particular, right, we have this already, and okay, this is something that we're missing. Let's go to our server and let's paste it in here. So right here, after we do the express, right, and we have our app, we're going to paste this right here. So let's talk about this real quick. So this here is configuring course, right? So configures course, right? Remember in Java, we did it with cross origin, right? And saying that we were allowing requests from any origin. So same thing here, but the mechanism is through headers. We're responding to our browser, hey, we're accepting requests from anybody. So go ahead, just pass me anything, I don't care. Also, we're saying that we're accepting, all the different types of HTTP requests, get, post, put, everything, delete, everything. Okay, so this configures course. Okay, it's a little bit different. The other difference here is that notice the syntax of this require, right? Notice that it's doing the require and then passing this parenthesis at the end. See that? It's slightly different than what we did. We mapped whatever the require was to this local variable and then immediately used it to call. Well, we could make this a little more compact, since this function here, we're not using it for anything else, right? We're using it for just calling this app, right? So why even bother declaring this variable? So instead, we can do away with this. I'm just going to rewrite this. I'm going to comment this out. Okay, so instead, what we could do is the following. We could write it this way, right? Because this returns what? This basically returns, this function right here. Right, returns this function right here. Returns this function right there. Okay, so since this is that function, we can just pass it this as an argument, right? We can invoke it right away. So this is a more compact syntax of doing the same exact thing. Okay. So anyway, so having done that, obviously you're gonna have to create clients, right? A client code on your React side for retrieving the quizzes and the questions. So I give you sample code for that, and then we're going to use those services to retrieve the quizzes, right, from a given course. We'll display the quizzes for that course. Actually, it's the same quizzes for all courses. We're not going to do like different quizzes for different courses. That'd be too complicated. We're just going to be just those 3 quizzes. That's it, right? So when you click on a quiz, on quizzes, right, you go to the quizzes component, which lists all the quizzes from the server. It lists them here with the names that come from the server. And when we click on start, right, we render the particular quiz as a list of questions. And those questions are different types of questions. One question might be multiple choice, another might be a true false, right? And they'll be implemented as different components, rendering different ways, right? If it's a multiple choice, it displays all the choices, and if it's a true false, it just displays those two choices. So the true false component behaves as follows, right? At first, it renders the question at the top, and the choice is true false, and then it allows you to click on either true false, and then down below it shows the answer that you chose. Okay, it shows the answer that you chose. When we click on grade, right, your browser is going to grade your question right away. It's not going to go out to the server and do anything fancy. It's just going to compare your answer with the correct answer, right? If they're the same, if your answer is the same as the correct answer, then it's going to highlight your correct answer as green, and it's going to put check boxes all over the place saying, yeah, yay, you answered right. If instead, when you click on grade, you had answered wrong, it's going to highlight your wrong answer as red, then X, right? Also an X at the top next to the question, right? And then it'll highlight the correct answer in green, right? The multiple choice is a general version of that, right? Before you answer anything, right, it displays your the question and the options. If you select a question, an answer, and you say grade, it grades it on the spot, and it compares your answer with the correct answer. If they're the same, right, it highlights your correct answer as green and puts check boxes. If instead you had selected the wrong answer, it doesn't match the correct answer, It highlights your answer as red with X's, and then it highlights the correct answer with a checkbox. Okay. This doesn't need to store anything on the server. We don't have a way to store anything anywhere, right? So this is going to be entirely on the browser side, right? On your React side on how to implement that. Okay. Anyway, that's the assignment for this week, and I believe this is due a week from Wednesday. Okay. Anyway, any question? All right, folks, that's all I have for you today.
Professor, can we ask a question about our project?
Project, sure. What's up?
So there are basically two small problems. The first one is for the routing, I cannot, can I share my screen now? Or you should store it record.
Oh, you mean as an office hour?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, no office hours, please.
Okay.
Do you have general questions on
how to implement? Oh no, then we'll come tomorrow.
Yes, I am exhausted. A very long day.
Hi, Professor. So,
yes.
So the doubt I had, should I ask you tomorrow? I messaged you. So.
I'm sorry?
Remember, I messaged you and then you told me to join at 9 o'clock. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no,
It's okay. I can ask you tomorrow too.
I'm sorry?
I can ask you tomorrow too. I'll just submit it.
Yeah, message me tomorrow morning and we can jump on a quick call at like 8 o'clock in the morning.
I wake up too late. Maybe around the afternoon or something.
Very early afternoon.
Okay. As soon as I wake up, I'm gonna just message you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you and have a good night.
All right. Thank you.
This is a super quick one. For part 1 and part 2 of the project, were we submitting just one per member? Sorry, one per group?
Say again?
So for the project part 1 and part 2, the form, the teams and project description, and then the project
yeah, only one per group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Professor. I just want to confirm tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.
Yeah, I'll be available around 8 or 9 in the morning. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Reach out to me and then we can jump Zoom call.
It's the same.
Right now, I'm not feeling well. So.
It's the same link as your office hour link, right?
Office hour, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, ping me first, and then we can jump in the office hour.
You mean message through?
Yeah,
phone?
you can message. You can text me, and then we can jump in office hour.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.